The co-authors on Chicken Soup for the Soul were rejected over 160 times. They would turn to each other and they'd say, okay, this one didn't work. Where's the next one? They didn't just tuck that submission into their desk drawer, into their computer, but they were looking for the next place to send it.
Microphone check, 1, 2, what is this?
You're now listening to a brand new episode of the Play Big Faster podcast.
Look what you done started. Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of the Play Big Faster podcast. We are joined in this episode by Terry Whalin. Terry is a serial author who has published over 60 books and worked with over 50 magazines and countless other authors. Terry, welcome to the podcast.
Sherry, great to be here with you today.
Before we started recording, I mentioned that you've been very busy. How did you actually find this as a passion of yours and just start the writing process?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It was a high school English teacher that saw something in my writing and encouraged me to join the newspaper staff of my high school. So I did that. They started me in sports, Sherry, and I'm a non-sports person, so I had no idea even the terminology or anything, so I had to learn all that. But ultimately, I became the editor of my high school newspaper. It's a small high school in Indiana. I decided from that I really liked writing, and I went to Indiana University, one of the top 10 journalism schools, to study journalism. Basically, back then, I blew off my classes and pretty much was writing stories because that's what we thought it was all about. There's over 30,000 students on the Indiana campus. We produced a full-size newspaper 6 days a week. There are about 100 of us on the writing staff. And this was in the pre-computer days, before we were using computers. We were using old Royal typewriters back then. And I'd been out at my fraternity drinking the night before, and I couldn't get my fingers on the right keys, and I kept saying to myself, Jesus Christ. And this little blonde-haired girl that was sitting next to me, she said, oh, Terry, don't say that, because one of these days when you really need Jesus, you'll call out for him, and he won't be there. And I thought, what's this? I'm a Christian. I go to church when I'm at home. I read the Bible in church when I'm at home. I didn't really know much about Christianity, but she encouraged me to go to a little bookstore a couple blocks off the Indiana campus. They had pretty cards and posters. Maybe I'd find a book that interested me. So I wandered down there a few days later. I bought this book called Jesus the Revolutionary. I thought, how in the world could Jesus be a revolutionary? And I read that book. It showed me a different side of Jesus than I'd ever seen before. And about that time, some people invited me to this little Jesus people gathering in downtown Bloomington, and they were sitting on little scraps of carpets with little candles lit. And those people had something that I didn't have. And I got a Bible, and I've been going the Jesus trail ever since. And so instead of becoming like a newspaper reporter, which is really what I thought I was going to do, I made a left-hand turn out of college, and I joined a group called Wycliffe Bible Translators. I spent 10 years in linguistics. And then I wandered back to my writing, but because I did that, I have a New Testament on my shelf in southwestern Cachiquel from Guatemala that wouldn't have existed if I hadn't have done that. And I became the editor of our little in-house magazine at Wycliffe Bible Translators, started writing for magazines. And then I went to writers' conferences, which is one of the things I encourage every writer to do. If you really want to get connected to this business, go to a conference, meet editors, agents, other writers, that kind of thing. And so I was out at one of these conferences, and an editor told me she had a problem. And I always listen when these editors tell me that. And this editor was David C. Cook, and she, as a part of the mission statement of that publisher, they want to tell kids about the world and how to go to the world out there. But she said, I don't have a single book that talks about that. What kind of ideas do you have? And so I said, my kids were little at the time. I was reading lots of children's books. And I knew that Stephen Lawhead, he goes by Steve Lawhead for his children's books, but he'd written this series of books called Howard Had a Hot Air Balloon, Howard Had a Spaceship. They combined real pictures with a little cartoon character. And I said, what if we did that for Wycliffe? Because we have real pictures at Wycliffe. You can get a cartoon character. We could show kids they can go anywhere. with what they want to do. My kid one day wants to be a police officer, and the next day he wants to be a doctor. There's all different kinds of things. So I used different occupations, and that ultimately became my first book that was published in 1993, a little children's book called When I Grow Up, I Can Go Anywhere for Jesus. And that's what launched me into the whole book writing area and everything.
Since then, I know you've worked with other authors. How did that come about? And in what capacity do you assist other authors?
I've written biographies on people like Billy Graham, Billy Sunday, Vanetta Flowers. As a matter of fact, I wrote her story, the first African-American ever to win a gold medal at the Winter Olympics. I wrote her book called Running on Ice. So it's just been a gradual process, but people wonder how in the world I've written 60 books, and it's pretty simple. I write just like anybody else, one page at a time, one project at a time, one deadline at a time. And that's been one of my areas of expertise, is that I really can meet the deadlines that the publisher has for me. And sometimes they're pretty crazy. Years ago, I wrote this diet book in about 17 days, over 48,000 words that I wrote in this diet book. And I was a hired gun from the publisher for that particular book. And my name's on the cover of all of them, but it's sold over 100,000 copies out there. It's called First Place. And because publishers want to publish diet books in January, that's when everybody has New Year's resolutions, they want to lose weight, all that kind of thing. I've just been involved in all different kinds of things over the years, and it's my passion, but I do it mostly because these books change people's lives. And I know that firsthand because I was at sophomore in college. I read this book called Jesus the Revolutionary that changed my life. So that's why I'm involved in this, and it's been really fascinating to me.
So Terry, for you, I can really hear a love of writing in your voice and just how you really tell your story. But now we have so many people who are just in thought leadership in different areas, and they are writing books for authority, for name recognition, for marketing. And they may not be as naturally talented or prone to writing. So a little birdie told me that you have written a new book that helps with some of the myths around writing books and publishing. So let's unpack that a little bit, because there are other people out there who may not be as great as Terry, but they are trying to put something on the shelves for people. How can we help them with your new book?
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I wrote this book called 10 Publishing Myths, Insights Every Author Needs to Succeed. And it's a little short book, but I talk to authors all the time because I work for a New York publishing house. And so we get a lot of submissions, thousands of submissions every year, and only do about 200 books a year. So I talk to a lot of authors in that process. And what I realized is that many authors have completely unrealistic expectations as far as what's going to happen for their book. Like the first myth that I have, for example, is that I will make a lot of money, because it's almost like the Kevin Costner Field of Dreams movie. People figure that if they write it and put it out there, it will sell and make a lot of money. That's not necessarily true. So I really try, and there's so much in the publishing process that's totally outside of our control as authors, anything that we can do. Another purpose of my book is I really tried to give authors practical things that any author could do to help tell people about their book. Because if you're not telling people about it, you're really missing a key responsibility that every author has.
You mentioned that maybe you may not make money with the book. There are some authors who are able to make a living writing books. I don't want to, discredit that. Are you saying that process looks different now? And if so, how?
I would say that you don't want to have that as your main goal of making money, because sure, you can make some money publishing a book, but it all depends on you and your connections here at the end of the day, as far as how you're going to market the book, how you're going to reach your readers, how you're going to take that book like an authority, like you said. Is that going to allow you to book speaking gigs and all kinds of things? So it is possible, but the reality is in the market, there's over 11,000 new books that are published every day. That includes the self-publishing books. So there's a lot of stuff that's pouring out into the market. So you have to figure out, how in the world are you going to reach your readers? What are you going to do? I'll talk to authors and they'll say, my audience is over on Facebook, or my audience is over on LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever it is. Those are all fine platforms. But in the business, we call those rented platforms because I don't control Facebook or LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, I could do something knowingly or unknowingly and get kicked off those places tomorrow. So you want to build your stuff on somewhere that you as an author can control. That would be like your website, your blog, your newsletter, things that you can actually do something with at the end of the day, and nobody can take that away from you. That's one of the great things about it.
So we're going to push some people to go out and support you and get this book, but without giving away all your secret sauce. What are some of the things that authors can do? Because I heard you say that you work for an actual publisher. And so you have some people that are going the self-publishing route. Can you distinguish what self-publishers can do versus the services that you would get at a traditional publisher?
Yeah, there's really three different areas here, Sherry. There's self-publishing, and I've met people that have spent $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 self-publishing their book. So you want to be aware that you don't have to necessarily do that. You want to make some cautious decisions about that. And you want to make sure you put a good book out there at the end of the day, no matter how you publish, whether you self-publish or independent or traditional publish. The other extreme are traditional publishers. In general, they control everything. They pick what the title will be, the cover, where the book will go, all that kind of thing. And then in the middle, there are these independent publishers. Morgan James, that I work for, is one of these independent publishers. Publishers Weekly had an article actually last week, and we were one of the top 10 independent publishers out there. We've been on this list 10 times. We've been around 20 years, printed over 20 million books. 29 New York Times bestsellers, 200 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So we have a really great reputation. So that's another option for people. It's a very different model. I spend a lot of time every day talking to authors about our model and the different way we work and see if that's a good fit. But that's another possibility for you.
When you mentioned that you may spend $20,000 to $30,000 self-publishing, where do you see most of those costs being assessed? What portion of the publishing process is someone potentially spending that much money?
That's a good question. You could spend that in a lot of different ways. Some of these actually self-publishers will upsell you into all their stuff, a screenplay, all kinds of things that they can sell you. And suddenly you spent $20,000 on this thing. And your book is only online. It's produced by somebody in the Philippines. So you really want to be careful about who you publish with. Take a look at their books, the name of the publisher into Google, along with the word scam or complaints. Every publisher has people that don't like them. We have some people that complain about us at Morgan James too, whether those things are true or not. But they're out there forever. But if you get pages and pages of somebody that's complaining about a publisher, that should be a real red flag to you not to go with those people. But you can spend money on all kinds of things. You can spend money on editing your book. You can spend money on the cover design, on the interior, on the marketing. Yeah, it's pretty easy actually to spend $10,000 or $15,000, $20,000 on this process and not have the kind of results that you want if you're not wise about where you spend that money.
Would you say that for most independent publishers, it's necessary to have a literary agent, or independent publishers accept manuscripts directly from writers? Because I know that there are some that will not.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I was a literary agent for a while, so I know about that process. And I work with agents. Only 30% of our authors at Morgan James have a literary agent. So you don't necessarily have to have one for us. Often it's harder to find an agent than it is to even get published in the first place. So it's pretty hard to find a really good agent. And some of those are not reputable. So you got to be careful there too. Who you sign up with, make sure that they have a good reputation and check them out. Each time, I always encourage people to check it out and be cautious about who you sign up for. As writers, we get a lot of people that say no to us. And I understand that if you get somebody saying yes, that's exciting. But you also want to be wise about who you work with at the end of the day.
If we've reached the point that a publisher says yes, definitely want to work with you to get your book out here into the world. What is a realistic time frame that writers should consider from the acceptance or an offer to publish the book to the time that you actually see the books on shelves?
Yeah, that's different for every publisher, but on the traditional side, it's 18 to 24 months. We're working way out on that kind of thing. At Morgan James, we get it done in about 9 months, but if you self-publish, that could be quicker, and that's one of the reasons that a lot of people self-publish is they want to get it out there quicker. But the thing that authors don't realize, Sherry, is that here in a number of years now, there's this thing called Nielsen Book Scan that records all of the book sales, whether it's self-published or whether it's published in a brick-and-mortar bookstore. And so publishers can look at that. It's a very expensive subscription to get that, but you're establishing a track record out there of what's happening with your books. And if I look it up and see that you've only sold maybe 100 copies of your book, that's one story compared to maybe you sold 10,000 copies. That makes you a lot more attractive. So there's a lot of those behind the scenes things that are going on that you have to be aware of.
You've given us so much great information, but if you had just one piece of advice to share with entrepreneurs on how to play big faster with publishing and working with publishers, what would it be?
Yeah, my advice would be, first of all, I want them to get my book. So I want them to go to publishingoffer.com, and you can get the book for $10. That includes the shipping along with over $200 worth of bonuses. I really try to make it easy for people to get it. They can also get the 11th myth from me. When I got my endorsements for this book, Alice Kreider wrote me back and she said, "Terry, you're missing the 11th myth." I'm like, "Oh, okay. What's the 11th myth, Alice?" She said, "The 11th myth should be that if I send my book to Oprah Winfrey, she'll book me on her show." And I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good myth because that's very unlikely for that to happen. And so what I decided to do is I decided to write that chapter. And when we designed the book, we made it look exactly like the rest of the book. People can get that for free from me if they go to terrylinks.com/11th myth, 11th myth, and put your name and your email address in there and you'll get that chapter from me for free. But really what I want to tell authors about how to play big is we get rejected a lot as authors. We hear the word no frequently. We send stuff out, don't get a response. We get ghosted. Or maybe we get just a form rejection letter. What I really want to encourage people is that I've been in some of the top literary agencies and publishers in this country in New York City. And when I go in those places, every time they're asking me, "Terry, where's the next nonfiction book? Where's the next best-selling book?" And so what that shows me, Sherry, is that they may not be responding to you, but they're actively looking at their email, they're reading it, they're reading their physical mail when it comes in. Because all of us are looking for that diamond in the rough, that submission that we go, wow, this is really something. Let's get this out into the world and get that book out there. It needs to be out there. Be encouraged that even if you're not getting any response, you want to just persist because that persistence and consistency is really going to pay off for you in the long run. Even the co-authors on Chicken Soup for the Soul, people forget they were rejected over 160 times. That's a lot of rejection. But what they did is they would turn to each other and they'd say one word. And the word was next. Okay, this one didn't work. Where's the next one? And so they didn't just tuck that submission into their desk drawer, into their computer, but they were looking for the next place to send it. It took them a long time. They finally found a little publisher in Florida that would publish their book, and the first Chicken Soup for the Soul book. And they told their publisher that they were going to sell 1 million books in the first year. Their publisher laughed at them. They thought that was a ridiculous idea. They never sold 1 million copies of anything at that point. It took them 1.5 years. And the reason they were able to do that is something that every person hearing this can do, is they practiced what they call the rule of 5. They got up every day and they did 5 things to be telling people about their book. They did a podcast, a radio show, a newspaper article, a magazine article, a live event, something day in and day out. And ultimately, that became the type of engine, steamroller, that made those Chicken Soup for the Soul books sell. And today, it's one of the best-selling series in the English language. It's amazing what this guy's did.
Terry, thank you so much for sharing with us. And everybody, go out. If you're watching this podcast or listening, go out and grab his book. We're going to also include that in the show notes. Terry, thanks for being here.
Sherry, really grateful to have this opportunity to be with you today.
And everyone else, play big faster.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and remember to play big faster.